This is Karina Ismendi, uh, science teacher, science teacher, and I am doing this video to help us all be on the same page as to what we're doing with science fair and to just kind of make sure that everybody gets everything because I know different people have different amounts of experience with science fair. So, first of all, what kinds of questions are not science questions? So, science questions cannot be questions that are matters of opinion or questions where people disagree and no one is wrong. So, as a little review, which science below are science questions and why? So, which ice cream is most popular? That is a science question. We can just do that. We can count whatever amount of people that we want to make that decision. Which ice cream is the best? No, because saying the best is a value judgment. We can say most popular because that's the thing we can count. The best is a value judgment, and that is not answerable by science. How much ice cream should you eat? Not really. It's the point that says should, that it's a value decision. If you say how much ice cream can you eat without increasing your chance of a heart attack or something like that, that could be a science question. But just with the should, that's a value judgment. How much did Americans spend on ice cream last year? That is a science question. We can look that up. We can count that. We can people will agree on that. Science questions are questions you answer with facts. So, facts are things that you see or measure that everyone sees or measures the same way. They are not opinions. So, examples of facts: how far is it to the moon? How much ice cream is in this particular package? Examples of not facts are: do you like the moon? Because that is an opinion. What kind of ice cream is best? Again, that's a value judgment. What you think is best is not what necessarily anybody else thinks is best, and no one is wrong. In science fair, we practice doing experiments. So, not merely doing library research. That's one thing that is different. So, it's not like an exhibit or kind of like a book report type thing. And we are not merely repeating a demonstration. So, an experiment is much more specific than that. In experiments, and to explain this, I'm giving bad examples and good examples. So, in the bad example on the left, if here's the experiment, I made an airplane and saw how far it flew. I did it 10 times. Why is that bad? Well, there's no independent variable. We are not testing the effect of anything. We're just flying an airplane 10 times. So, just repeating something does not make it an experiment. Changing that a little bit to make it a good experiment, uh, I made 3 different airplanes and saw how far each one flew. I did it 10 times. So, why is that good? Testing the effect of the different airplane types on flight distance, that is an experiment. So, the independent variable is then the type of airplane. Another one, bad experiment. I made 2 cake recipes and saw which one tasted better. Why is that bad? There's no numerical dependent variable. So we're not measuring anything numerically that comes out of that experiment. Also, one person's opinion isn't reliable, especially the experimenters. So here's the way to make that same experiment better. I made 2 different cake recipes and had 10 different people fill out a form for which they liked better. Why is that good? So having a numerical count of how many people liked a cake better is a good dependent variable. Also, the form keeps opinions secret because you wouldn't want to do that in a group of people because people tend to copy each other. Okay, an experiment also has a hypothesis. A hypothesis has these characteristics. It's a prediction. It relates 2 variables to each other, the independent and the dependent variable. We'll say more about that in a second. And it's testable. So that means it can be disproven by facts. And it's limited to the specific experiment. So it's not too large and general, it's specific to an experiment. Um, and I like, for talking to students, I like the dinosaur train definition the best of any I have ever seen, um, where they say, I have a hypothesis. And they said, you mean an idea you can test? Because that idea of testing is essential to a hypothesis. A hypothesis clearly defines a relationship between two variables. It predicts what you think will happen in an experiment. The experiment must try at least two different values for the independent variable. The experiment must measure what happens to the dependent variable under both values of the independent variable. So if we, the experimenter, are making two groups basically that differ by the independent variable. So there's independent variable value 1 or value 2, at least those two. And then we see what comes out, what's the value of the dependent variable um, for the different independent variables. Okay, so let's define these. It's kind of going around in circles, chicken and egg of which thing to define first. But the independent variable, um, it can be numerical or categorical. So remember, this is the thing that we're changing as the experimenter. What we're deciding is going to be the difference between the groups. It can be numerical or categorical. So if it's categorical, there should be about the same number in each category. So it can be like, say, males and females or something like that. You would want to have about the same number of males and females, or tall and short, or live in the forest, live in the plains, whatever you're going to do. The dependent variable is the thing that comes out of that, and the dependent variable must be numerical. Um, so it's got to be something that is a count or a measurement. Okay. So it can't be another categorical variable, not at this time with these kids, because you'd have to do weird statistical things to get that to work. It's possible, but it's not possible at the non-high school level. Okay. Controlled variables, sometimes called controls. They are everything else that is held the same between tests. This may be a very long list, so it's not like independent and dependent where there's a single one of those. Controlled variables is everything else. Okay, I'm going to go through some examples now to make this hopefully make more sense. So here's an example, a simple plant water experiment. So in this one, the independent variable, the one the experimenter chooses to change, is the amount of water. The dependent variable, the one expected to change as a result of the independence change, is the plant height. And a simple hypothesis could be, if I increase the amount of water, then the plant height will increase. Now remember, the hypothesis does not have to be correct. We do not care if it is correct or not. We're going to test it. We care if it's testable because we'll find out if it's right or not by doing the hypothesis. So more on the independent variable. What is it? It is the one thing you change. In the plant experiment, it's the amount of water. When talking to students, you can say I for independent and I for I change it. The dependent variable is the thing that happens, the thing you don't know what is going to happen, and then you have to do the experiment to test it. So in our experiment, the simple example, it's how much the plant grows. So you can remember D for dependent and D for the data that you measure. Constant variables, sometimes called constants or controls, they are the things you keep the same so it's a fair test. So in the plant experiment, it's everything else about the plants and their environment. So the kind of dirt, the size of the pot, the amount of sunlight they get, the kind of the plant, the size of the plant, all kinds of other things that you could do. Basically, everything should be as much the same as you can possibly manage rather. Okay. So why have constants? So that we know that the results are caused by the independent variable. So here, the amount of water. If we change anything else at the same time, we won't know that it's from the water only. Okay, so what do kids have to write? They have to write down their procedures, or which is sometimes called methods. Students should describe what they will do in their experiment so completely that no reasonable person could misunderstand them. They must include precise measurements of materials. Um, if it's something that there's like a lot of, like in like the air, you could say like, well, it's just regular atmospheric air. I don't think that anybody's going to do anything that's that precise. You have to have accurate naming of materials, especially if you're testing brands. You need to know exactly what kind that brand is, what the brand calls itself. Numerical measurements or counts, no vague descriptions that cannot be graphed. Um, and the procedures or methods will probably be the longest part of the project and the most writing. And this should be written before doing any tests. I get with students that they will want to say like, well, I don't know because I didn't do it yet. It's like, no, you should think about it beforehand. And I always have students show it to me before they go on. And so I can say, no, don't do that. That doesn't make any sense, or you're going to have trouble with that, or, things like that, so that you can troubleshoot before they do anything and get really attached to it. Okay, in making data tables, because that will be part of them figuring out what to do, um, it'll be different depending on if your independent variable is categorical or numerical. So I have a little flow chart here to help you with this. So is your independent variable measured in categories or numbers? If it's categories, it'll be like cold or hot, different brands, colors, or genders, or something that is like either or. You can also break numerical ones into different categories if you think that that's useful, like if you wanted to do small, medium, large, even though you're measuring by a certain size that you would define. Anyway, so for categories, you'd do something like what is written in blue here, having the dependent variable for category 1 and the dependent variable for category 2. So like if you had, for our plant one, if you had a lot of water, then you'd see how high they grew, and then less water, and then you'd say exactly what that was. So an example over here with bubblegum bubble blowing size, you could say the bubble size with Trident gum, and the bubble size is in centimeters, or bubble size with Hubba Bubba gum, which I don't even know if they make anymore, in centimeters. If you're doing numerical, so let's go back up and then go to the right where there's the red box, numbers like measurements of height, weight, days, distance, or age, or anything like that, where the independent variable is numerical. It's measured as a number. You could have the independent variable in one column and the dependent variable in the next column. This will make it easier to graph if you're doing something like with Google Sheets. So for example, if you had the amount of baking soda in teaspoons, so it'd be like 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, 3 teaspoons, and then the volume of foam that you get from doing some experiment with them in milliliters. So those are both numerical. Okay, another thing you have to do according to how they'll be judged in the science fair is investigation trials. So this is a thing to keep an eye on. There should be at least 10 trials in an investigation. Older students or simpler experiments should have more trials. So no experiment should only have 2 trials. And I would say if you have 2 categories, you should go up evenly, like 2, 4, 6, 8. You should have even numbers in each category. Okay, and if something takes like 2 seconds to do, it would be ridiculous to only have 2 things like that. And similarly, if something is really takes longer, you can adjust that and say like, okay, it's reasonable for you to only have like 4 trials or something like that. Data collection. Um, they will have to present their raw data with dates that it was collected, and units for all measurements should be presented. It should either be labeled somewhere on the page. It can be on the poster itself, or it can be in a lab notebook that's included with the poster. Data analysis. Okay, so data should be analyzed using a bar graph or scatter plot where it is grade appropriate. If your kids are so young that they have never done a graph, like an XY graph, they could also do a bar graph. Um, data analysis tables should use averages to simplify findings so it isn't just a restatement of data collection. So, like if you have multiple measures for the same thing, um, the kids should average those together and put that as their data analysis. So then they're only comparing two things. Graphs should have the independent variable on the x-axis and the dependent variable on the y-axis. And again, whole raw data should also be presented in the data collection section. So it's kind of proving I really did this. You are mostly going to need, if you're doing graphs, bar graphs or scatter plots. And I would really encourage you to get students to do at least one of these. And I'm just going to go through quickly like the things that to make a graph appropriate for science. It should have a title that explains a little of the experiment. Excuse me. So here's a bubblegum one. Does gum flavor affect bubble diameter? So that just sort of summarizes what the experiment is in the title. It should not say science experiment, okay? Because everybody's graph is science experiment. It doesn't really help you. The unit that you use to measure and the axis should be labeled, both the dependent and the independent. So here on the x-axis, it's categorical, so you don't need the unit on this one. This one, you're using a bar graph looking at the pink box because the independent variable is categories. So categories get a bar graph. If you're using an independent variable that is numerical also, so you have numbers both on the x-axis and on the y-axis, then a scatter plot is more appropriate. So in this one, it does height, predict how high you jump. On the x-axis is the independent variable, the person's height in feet, and then the unit that you use to measure has to be marked there also. If it doesn't have the unit, then you can't really tell what it's about. Okay, so label the axes have to have units, it has to have a title, it has to be the appropriate kind of graph. In the conclusion, and it does not have on the, you may want to have a results section also where they state their results in text rather than just the graph if you wanted to be more realistic. It is not on the Warren Science Fair rubric, which I don't super understand, but they didn't ask me. Okay, so in the conclusion, you restate the hypothesis. And then the student says whether the data support or do not support the hypothesis. So the prediction that you thought would say, did you see that or did you not? And it's okay if you don't. They state in words the trend in the data that supports or doesn't support the hypothesis. Also, then it will ask new questions that result from this conclusion. So that is, what would you investigate next? And real world applications, or basically why we should care about this. And there's almost always a reason that they can find if they look carefully and if they know, like that you can help them with to have some like larger scale perspective. Okay. Last thing is I wanted to have a link to the official Warren Science Fair rubric in case you don't have access to that. I'm always losing, so it's linked in this, and I will send you also this slideshow. Thank you.